Joining me now is the author of international bestsellers, The Strange Death of Europe, The Madness of Crowds, and his latest work, The War on the West. Douglas Murray, let's start with immigration. It's a big issue in Australia. We're seeing record numbers of migrants coming in, despite polls showing the majority of Australians want to see immigration numbers drop. And that is also the overwhelming sentiment across Europe, with a recent poll taken in March and April this year showing great opposition to not only illegal immigration, but also the current volume of migrants coming into Europe. More than 70% said their country takes in too many migrants, and that includes countries as diverse as Sweden to Spain to Austria. The Greeks are the most opposed to their migration numbers. 90% there say that country takes too many. And yet, Douglas, the will of the majority seems to be completely ignored, whether it's Australia or Europe. When it comes to migration policy, majority opinion doesn't seem to matter much.
Absolutely, Rita. And these latest findings in Australia and across Europe are replicated, of course, in America. I mean, most people in the developed world, most people in the countries that people want to come to, are aware that we just can't take in all of the people who would like to come to our countries. I mean, Australia is in a much better position societally, financially, socially, and much more than most countries in the region. And it's the same with Europe. Europe's freer, more prosperous, infinitely more prosperous, even at the lowest rung of the ladder than most of the countries that people come to there from. And it's the same with America, with Central America and Southern America. And so the publics know this. But the political response, as you just referred to, seems to always be, whoever you have in power, more of the same. I mean, there are occasionally prime ministers and presidents who are able to slow down the flow. But even then, it's to a barely manageable level. And what these political leaders don't realize is that the public know more than them. We, the public, sense in the decline in trust, in the decline in safety, in all sorts of things. We sense what the changes are that happen, not when migration happens, but when too much migration happens too fast and often of the wrong kind. And I think, this is the big challenge of the 21st century. And so far, we haven't really thrown up politicians capable of dealing with it.
And it seems those who scream the loudest about threats to democracy are very silent when it comes to the will of the majority here being ignored. In fact, they seem to be doing a lot to obstruct the will of the majority. Now, let's talk about President Joe Biden, who's repeating a verifiable lie about inflation. He's repeated a lot of verifiable lies over the years. He's saying that it was 9% when he came to office, when it was actually 1.4%. Karine Jean-Pierre was asked to explain why the president's repeated this lie.
We got a lot of incoming on this yesterday. And look, what the president was, the point that he was making is that the factors that caused inflation was in place when he walked into the administration, when he took office. As you know, the pandemic caused inflation around the world.
Douglas, I know the US has much bigger issues to deal with right now, the border crisis, cost of living, crime, but a president who can't stop lying about verifiable data, I mean, it's not something to be overlooked.
Well, I would just say that, the point of the White House spokesperson is meant to be to sort of be the mouthpiece of the president. Joe Biden has found a mouthpiece in Karine Jean-Pierre, which I think even he must wonder at times whether what she's saying isn't gobbledygook or not. She's by no means the best interpreter of Joe Biden's statements. And goodness knows sometimes Joe Biden could do with a good interpreter. Yes, I mean, this is the sort of behavior which, if it happened under a Republican president, it would all be, fact-checking the fact-checkers, and the Washington Post would be explaining to everyone how democracy dies in darkness, and the BBC's Verify fact-checked czar would be onto it. But, old Joe Biden, it doesn't matter, and it can all be explained away incoherently by his spokesperson.
Yeah, even I felt a little bit sorry for her because how do you defend that? And yeah, but her explanation did not help the president or herself in any way.
It could have been worse, of course. It could have been explained by Kamala Harris, who would have explained that the thing is that the past has just gone before the present and the future is yet to come. And in a very real sense, the present is before the future, and that's why inflation is there.
And then we would just have mad cackling for about 60 seconds after that. But let's stick with the Biden White House, their incoherent and inconsistent decision-making. Douglas, you've written about this, about how the president says something that's very sound 1 minute, and the next day he does something that's completely at odds with that. You talked about the wise words he said last week about Israel. And then within hours, he was attempting to prevent Israel's victory in Gaza by withholding arms shipments. How do you explain this erratic behaviour?
Well, it's very strange. I mean, the best interpretation of it is that for some time, and you and I have discussed this before, Rita, for some time the president has talked a bit of one talk and acted in another way. Now, for those of us who want Israel to win in Gaza against Hamas, sometimes, you know, that's the rhetoric has been unpleasant, but the actions have been supportive. So, for instance, at various times, President Biden, we presume, has sent out, for instance, Chuck Schumer to be critical of the Israeli reaction. Occasionally, Joe Biden has been critical himself, but he's done that in order, it seems, to placate a bit of the base in his own party, keep the students from going bananas all the time on campus, and hope to get in November, whilst at the same time supporting America's ally, Israel. The thing that was different this past week has been that it flipped exactly the other way around. The rhetoric from the president on the day was very good, very supportive, all about standing by our allies and all that sort of thing. And then in the evening, he stopped the delivery of arms supplies to Israel. Now, that is a very serious development, because a lot of the sort of the talk, the chaff of the media cycle, particularly in America, you know, is performative. It's for the base. It's for a certain bit of the base. It's for the 3 or 4 people watching some of the smaller left-wing networks. But the really difficult thing here, as I say, is that he actually did something which he had always said he wouldn't do. He's always held himself out as a great ally of Israel in its fight for survival and its fight for victory over its enemies. And here he is in charge in the White House, withholding arms at a time when Israel is pretty close to victory against Hamas. How you can say you're an ally and you're with someone till the bitter end, only to drop out at about last orders, I just do not know.
And that's what worries me, because as we know, actions are more important than words, and he has flipped that dynamic. And what would happen to Israel if they don't defeat Hamas after 7 months of this war, if in the end Hamas isn't completely eradicated?
Well, my view is, and I think it's a view that a lot of Israeli politicians and others feel, a lot of the Israeli public feel, is that you cannot destroy 80% of Hamas. You cannot leave them in, you cannot take them out of Gaza City, and you cannot take them out of a set of other towns and so on, and leave them intact in Rafah. And Rafah is reckoned to be not just where the remaining Israeli hostages are held, hostages who the rest of the world seems to have forgotten about, but the Israeli people quite rightly haven't. And there's no point in leaving that there and leaving those people there and leaving the heads of Hamas, including, it seems, Sinwar, the mastermind of the 7th, in Rafah. All it means is like putting out 80% of the fire, that the Israelis will withdraw from Gaza, and Hamas will grow back, will continue to subjugate the Palestinian population in Gaza, will continue to enrich themselves, and will prepare for the next attack against Israel. And my prediction is that these, you know, every other year wars that Hamas has been provoking since it took control of the Gaza would just go on in that scenario. I think it is much better for the Israeli public and indeed for the Palestinian public in Gaza, that Hamas are done for, that it's over, and that other partners in the region can help in whatever way they can to rebuild the society there. It is not going to be an easy job, but it will be infinitely harder if Hamas still have any kind of a stronghold. So preventing Israeli victory, once again, would lead only to another set of cycles of conflict. And I don't think that's desirable.